Hello, friends and families. Welcome to the EDUCA DPS podcast, where we inform families and connect communities. My name is Javier Ibarra, your host of the English version of this podcast. Today, we have a very special treat for our audience. Today, in the studio, we have Dr. Patricia Urrieta, Director of the Latine Student Success Team here at Denver Public Schools. Our topic will be a conversation about the results of the Raza report, and we're going to get into terminology. I strongly suggest you all stick around through the end of this podcast because our topic is one that is going to get a lot of attention here for our DPS community. But let's get started and introduce our guests. I want to start with asking Dr. Urrieta about her journey through Denver Public Schools. Dr. Pat, how are you today?
I'm fine, thank you, Javier. I started DPS when I was 5 years old as a kindergartner. I graduated from Abraham Lincoln High School, and while I was in high school, I worked as a student sweeper after school cleaning classrooms. Once I graduated from Denver Public Schools, I went to college, I went on to Metro, and decided to become a teacher and thought, what if I don't like kids? And so I became a paraprofessional because I didn't want to go to school for all those years and then not like children.
Right.
And it turned out I really love children. And so I became a teacher in 1993. It's been a while. Taught first grade and kindergarten in a bilingual classroom. I started off at Columbian.
Okay.
I've been on through many schools in the West Side as a student and as an employee.
Always here at DPS?
Always, for the most part, here at DPS. I took 1 year and went to Adams 14.
Okay.
I was a director of teaching and learning there, and I oversaw the bilingual program there as well. So I was a teacher for 7 years, and I've been in administration since then, so about 25 years of administrative experience. I've been a principal at 2 different schools. Godsman was the first school where I was principal, where I was able to develop a full-blown one-way dual language school.
Wow.
Our kiddos at 5th grade, I took advantage of a law we had that was creating innovation schools, so we didn't necessarily need to follow all of the rules and regulations in DPS, but I was able to really use the money to do better for our students and to hire the staff I needed. And then from there, I went downtown and was the director of our culture, equity, and leadership team and did that for about 1.5 years. But I really miss the kids. Like, that's truly where my heart is. And so I went back to Grant Ranch, which was my neighborhood school. So I went from a school that was one-way dual language to a school that was predominantly Chicano students and families. And they have completely different needs, and they have very similar needs. And so I really enjoyed the contrast. Chicanos have been very marginalized in the district for a long time. I, being one of them, completely understood many of the issues that they were dealing with and much of the anger that was behind them, and was able to really create a school where they all felt like they belonged. And we did have the opportunity last year to welcome one Venezuelan student because we're really far southwest, and she loved the school. Her mom tried to move her someplace closer to central Denver, and she told her she wanted to stay. And so I never thought I'd leave Grant Ranch, but this opportunity came along, and I avoided it at first because I have 32 years in the district as a licensed professional.
Wow.
And I thought I would probably be considering retirement, not another job. But I couldn't pass it up. There's just it's too good to be true, in a sense, to have a whole department focused on the success of our Latina students. And so here I sit as the director of this brand new department and this brand new role.
Let me ask you this, because this is what I meant by having a very special guest. Where did you go to elementary school?
Which school? I went to many elementary schools. So I started at Valverde as a kindergartner.
Okay.
And then I went to Knapp as a first grader.
Okay.
And then I went to Cheltenham as a second and third grader.
Okay.
My parents bought a house and we settled down in Southwest Denver, and I went to Force and then Koonsmiller and then Lincoln.
We have very similar, I would say, upbringings, and this is what I mean by having a very special guest, because I'm also from the Southwest. So from Barnum to Rishel to West, right? And so and then I went to MSU Denver as well. And I've known your daughter for a long time as well. And so I feel like we're having family here on the show, and this is why I'm so excited, especially about the topic today, because I was a student at DPS, a Latino student, Latina. We're going to talk about the different terminology, if you will, but I wanted to get your expertise as the foundation of the show today, because it's going to be really important for our families to understand that the work that is being done on their behalf is being done by someone who is part of that community, who understands the community, who taught that community for so long. And so I think that's the added benefit of having you here today to talk about that. So about the topic, La Raza report emerged from a research project conducted by the Multicultural Leadership Center, LLC, and examines the experiences of the Latino community in Denver Public Schools over several decades. So this was an extensive research project for them. The report offers recommendations, which is what we're going to get into, for improving experiences for the Latino student families and employees overall, the system experience here at DPS. So you talked a little bit about your role and what you do, but can you tell us in specific, right? What is it that you do right now in your current role, and what is your current role?
My current role is the director of the Latina Student Success Team. And so what I'm doing right now is really combing through the report, ensuring that I understand the voices of our Latina population in the district, meeting with outside community groups, external partners, in order to understand what their needs are. Because while the report is very in-depth and encompass many, many, many focus groups, surveys, academic achievement records, they didn't necessarily speak to our outside community. And so I'm meeting with many members of our outside community to truly understand what they see as well. And it is matching up. So it's almost like I'm checking the work that was done.
Sure.
Not that I don't trust the researchers, because they're incredible.
Absolutely.
I know many of them, have known many of them for multiple decades.
Yeah, they're notable people here in
Absolutely.
In the city. Absolutely.
Yep. And so it's given me it's just so impressive to see the work that our community has done and has been doing through all of these years, ensuring that we don't lose our race. Ensuring that we're able to keep our language if that's a possibility, ensuring that people do feel seen and heard in the city, not just in our schools. And so that's been a big chunk of my job. There's also an advisory council that the superintendent put together. Dr. Marrero was brilliant in compiling this advisory council. It's comprised of former superintendents and city leaders, and so it's been incredible to have this group meet. We've met about 8 times and combed through the research and the recommendations to determine our next steps. And
why is this work important? I mean, I understand that we started it, did it, but why did we even have it? What is it necessary? What is the point of that?
So as you know, DPS is in my heart, it's in my soul, it is a piece of who I am, but it always has not been the best place to be. You know, there were pockets of excellence when I was going through school as a child. We did Las Posadas when I was at Cheltenham. Other than that, I never really saw myself in the school. When I was in high school, you know, nobody came to me and said, hey, do you want to go to college? I went to college because my dad offered to pay the first semester, not because anybody at school looked for me and said, hey, you're pretty smart, maybe you should go to school. And so it's important that all of our students are seen and heard, and that their families have a voice in decision making. You know, I know a lot of our families work 2 or 3 jobs, and yet there's still a way to be involved.
Absolutely.
Even if it's just helping with homework, that's critical. Making sure that your child gets 8 hours of sleep every night and is well fed, you know, that they're nutritionally ready to come to school too, because that's what feeds your brain. So it's important in so many aspects. We have a new House Bill 191192, I believe, that is requiring ethnic studies. And so it's not just DPS and families saying, hey, this is important. Even the state sees the need for it.
I think you and I had a very similar upbringing in the sense of what our experience was through DPS. And I think it differs from the experience that our students are having today, which is a good thing. I think that our students today are really set up for success, but it's like you were saying, right? We can do better. And we are doing better. And it's I think it's a journey, right? It's not like, okay, we finally reached better and we're done with the work. No, it's a continuous, things change, culture changes, perceptions change, and so it's important for us to stay with the times of what education is being taught today. But it's amazing when I go into our schools, and I'm very lucky to have a position here at DPS where I can go to a lot of the schools and see the work that's actually being done from an academic perspective. I thought was really cool. I was at a school just last semester where they were showing me the textbooks that they had, and they had Latinos in the textbook.
Oh, nice.
And so the kids saw themselves in the textbook, and I thought, growing up, I never saw anyone who looked like me, who was like me, even the curriculum. It wasn't until I started at MSU Denver where I did Chicano studies. And I started actually reading some literature that was about my people, written by my people, right? And so I think that added aspect made me want to read that book more, and then go into depth and meet the author, right? But if we could do that at the K-12 level, think of the learning outcomes that we could have, right? And so I think it's very important that you mentioned that. But for our audience today, I want to read this short blurb about the term Latinx. So choosing the term Latinx, there are many terms that have historically emerged to describe what we commonly known as the Latino or Hispanic community, right? We've had Mexican American, Chicano, Hispanic, Latino, Latina, Latinx, and now we're on the term of Latinx to describe the people with roots from Spanish-speaking countries or Latin-speaking countries who may or may not know or have spoken Spanish. So all that to say, and I think this is going to be the most exciting question, is why did you choose, or we choose, the term Latinx?
So like you said before, education is ever evolving. So is language. I was very much set in my ways as a new teacher. If I heard people speaking Spanglish, to me that was like an abomination.
Sure.
I use it all the time. I grew up using Spanglish.
Right.
I was a simultaneous bilingual, spoke both languages at the same time, and yet I was really firmly rooted in this one way of seeing the world. I had a friend from the San Luis Valley, and so she spoke a very different Spanish, which to me was not proper Spanish. And it took me a long time to truly understand that our language is who we are. And that leads me into, I identify as a Chicana. I'm a female, born in the Southwest. My father came from Juarez, from Chihuahua, and my mom was born on this side of the Rio Grande, but just by a little bit.
In El Paso.
In El Paso, Texas. That's where I was born.
Yes, I could guess that, yeah.
Yep. Sometimes my language gives it away.
Yeah.
And so once I finally understood that there isn't just one kind of Spanish, there's not just a formal kind of Spanish. Spanish comes out in many ways. And so when we think of the term Latinx, it took me a little bit to wrap my head around it, to be perfectly honest. I went around and asked folks, what do you call yourself? What do you think we should call ourselves?
Sure.
Of course, the older folks, people my age and older, Latino, Latina, they don't really like the term Chicano. Some of them do, some of them don't. For my mom, that was a bad word.
Yeah.
I wasn't even allowed to use it.
Well, because originally it was meant to be disrespectful, and then that group reclaimed it.
Yes.
And so I think that's, depending on where you are in history, you either were a part of it where they were calling you that and it was derogatory, or you're part of it where you're proud.
Yep, just like the term black.
Yes.
And so I claimed it when I was at Metro because, like you, that was the first place. The class that I took was called The Education of the Chicano Child. And that's where my calling to become a teacher happened. because I didn't feel like I suffered all the things that I learned about.
Sure.
But I probably did. When you're a child, you don't recognize that. It's up to us as the adults to ensure that our children are not being treated in that way, which is why I'm sitting in this role. And so as I spoke to these different groups and asked about what term, some of the younger folks who are part of the Latino Education Coalition and the Latino Education Advisory Council, there's two, they feel very strongly that Latina is the proper term right now in this context, because we have so many people in the LGBTQ community that don't necessarily identify as Latino or Latina, and Latina encompasses all of us.
Right. And it's important to know that the term Latinx grammatically is not correct, but the term Latine is, and has that connotation or representation of all, regardless of your gender.
Yes.
And so I think that that's why that term is so powerful. Latine is so powerful because it aims at the inclusivity that Latinx had with the grammatically correct portion of it as well, if my understanding is correct.
That's what my understanding is as well, and I am by far not the expert.
No.
I am not a linguist.
Even though you and we're both part of that community.
Yes.
Yes. When I was growing up, my parents told me that I was Mexican.
Me too.
And they told me that because I didn't learn English until I was 12. Even though I was born here in Denver, I didn't learn English until I was 12.
Wow.
I actually learned it here at good old Denver Public Schools. And so I struggled a lot with English, but not with math, right? And then after that, I learned the term Hispanic because we would watch Univision, and they would have this thing called Orgullo Hispano. And they would have like local celebrities or people of note who would look like us that were doing great things in the community or nationwide. And it was always a silly goal for me to want to be one of those people. And then they did away with that segment.
Oh.
Yeah, I don't think they do that anymore. And so, but that term always stuck with me, right? Which is different because I think that here in the Southwest, it's important to note, like, we're here in the Southwest, right?
Yes.
And for a long time before all of the migration happened here in Denver, it was a lot of the terms that you heard here were Chicano or Hispanic.
Mexican American.
Mexican American, but you didn't really hear the term Latino. The term that where you heard Latino was on the East Coast, right? Because those have traditionally a Hispanic or Latino a migration of the Caribbean from the islands, so Puerto Rico, the Dominican Republic, and other countries, Cuba, Colombia, Venezuela. And so all of those folks really migrated to the cities on the East Coast. But here in the Southwest, these folks who have been here for a while, and I learned this in my Chicano studies class, right? You said your friend from the San Luis Valley, like, there's a term that says the border
didn't cross us.
Yeah, we didn't cross the border crossed us.
Yep.
Because all of this was Mexico, right? And so those folks had always been here with their Spanish last names. And so it's really amazing, and I love talking about this here at DPS because it's an opportunity for people to understand you better. And when they understand you better, truly there you can have acceptance.
Yes.
And so this is why the work that you're doing is important, and why I'm probably, I wouldn't say your biggest fan, maybe number 2 or 3, right? I'm sure you have folks that are like really excited for this, but I'm top 5 at least.
Oh, thank you.
Yes. So I want to start with the actual La Raza report. What is it? Tell me the details of it. Why is it again? What are the outcomes for it?
The first detail is that it is 261 pages with a 121-page supplemental report.
Wow.
It's huge. The report covered about the last 20 years of achievement in the Denver Public Schools, how our students are performing against all other students. It included data from the Colorado Measures of Academic Success, so the CMAS test. So when people say, why is it so important to take the CMAS test? This is one of those reasons. It included small focus groups with many, like thousands of people, not just 200 or 300. But I think there were over 5,000 respondents in one way or another whether it was a focus group, a survey. They went into schools and talked with different people, interviews, spoke with students, families, staff. So there's a lot of data, both quantitative and qualitative. My favorite is always the qualitative, because that's where the voices of our people truly shine.
Yes.
Where they really tell us what it is exactly that they want. The quantitative just tells us if we're doing good enough with teaching our kids how to read and write. And so this work has, it was done by 5 researchers. I think there were a few more. But like Luis Torres is, he's retired now. Dr. Luis Torres is a Chicano Studies professor from Metro. Dr. Kathy Escamilla, Dr. Manuel Escamilla are both researchers out of Boulder, have done a lot of work around family and community engagement and dual language programs for our Spanish speakers. Dr. Steven Del Castillo, he was a professor out of Boulder, a professor of economics and leadership and all kinds of incredible things. Dr. Ramon Del Castillo was also a professor at Metro.
And his brother.
Yep.
Yes.
They're brothers.
Yes.
Quite different. They're really interesting. I love working with them. And he taught Chicano Studies and is a poet, and they're all activists in some way and have been for many decades in our city. And so it's an incredible report that is really great reading. It talks a lot about redlining and why there is segregation in our city, and that it's not the school segregating, but it was actually done over at least a century based on where you could actually even buy a house.
Is there redlining today?
We would like to think no, but there are only certain places you can actually afford to live. So for instance, my daughter is currently a first-time home buyer, and she can only afford a very specific area of the city.
Yes.
And so while I don't think it's as blatant and as explicit as it was, I do think it still exists in some way, shape, or form. You know, it talks about the Ku Klux Klan, the origins here.
It goes that far back.
It goes that far back.
Wow.
It talks about our veterans returning from the Vietnam War, from World War II, and how they were treated. It talks about gentrification. So it goes from way far back to right now where we're at.
So it's safe to say that it gives us a lot of insights about where we are in this moment of time and how we got here.
Yes.
Right? Because it's important. People ask, well, why are we here? How did we get here? Why are things the way they are? Well, here's why, and the report goes into that. I might be one of the, and I'm sure there's a lot of folks, but one of the folks that really read the report in order to understand it, in order to be able to do the work that I do here at DPS. And so I remember when we did the press conference, and a lot of folks were asking great questions around what's next. Right? What is next? So we have this report. We know what essentially we need to work on and who needs to be a part of it. And so my next question for you is, how do you plan to address the 35 recommendations that are in the report? How does you and your department plan to address all of that?
So there are 35 recommendations. It is a lot.
Yes.
They come out of 10 themes, which range anywhere from adequate resources for schools, to bullying in schools, school safety, to being seen in schools and in curriculum. So these 35 recommendations are grouped by school, student, district, parents, staff. There might be one more group that I'm not remembering. So we took these 35 recommendations along with this advisory council, and we have looked at them every which way you can in order to figure out what's most important, what can we do quickly, and what might have to wait a year or two so that we can get to the most important things first. So we have 5 areas of focus that we will be working on, developing a strategic plan, a 1-year strategic plan, and then a 3-year strategic plan.
I have many questions
about
that because being involved in the La Raza report rollout and a member of the community, I want to know how we're going to be measuring these things, what do student outcomes look like, but specifically, and which leads me to my next question is, what does this mean for parents? How can parents, students, community members at large, how can they get involved with the work that you and your department are doing?
So our areas of focus include student achievement. We'll be looking at early literacy and at secondary post-readiness, college and career ready, along with rigorous course involvement or enrollment, and looking at students who are receiving the seal of biliteracy. So one of the best things parents can do to help with this endeavor is to read with their kids. Have their kids read to them, they read to their children, they talk about what they're reading, they can help them retain their native language.
Huge.
So I know my dad used to do Spanish only days, but when you're 13.
My dad used to as well.
We used to go silent. Because I was I wasn't super ornery as a kid, but there was a little bit of a rebel in me.
Yeah.
And so when he would try to implement that, I just wouldn't talk to him for that day. So it did work with my brother. It just didn't work with me.
Yeah.
But I was able to retain my native language because we use it a lot in my house.
Yes.
And it has become Spanglish for us. And it's quite the gift. Where I thought Spanglish was not a good thing, it is really quite the gift to be able to speak in two languages at the same time.
Absolutely. It's funny how the brain works that way.
Yes.
Yeah.
And if I can't find a word in Spanish, I will use it in English and vice versa.
Yeah. And the point is you understand it.
Yes.
And the people who you're speaking to also understand it.
Yes, and you do retain some level of academic Spanish by doing that. And so if students can retain their native language, they can test in, and that goes for any language, not just Spanish. I want to be clear about that. It could be American Sign Language. It can be any of our native languages that have been here in the United States long before we were here. It can be an African language, whatever language they can obtain a seal of biliteracy for, which is then on their transcript. And they would test in the high school in order to prove proficiency in that second, third, fourth, fifth language. The second thing that we're working on is family and community engagement. And so our FACE department does an amazing job of offering FACE University. We will be contributing to classes on FACE University so that parents can learn about what are the committees in the school that make decisions and how can I join them and have my voice heard.
Right, which is important.
It's so important. What are the committees at the district level that I can join and have my voice heard? Because sometimes we just don't know what's available, what the opportunities are. How can I contribute to the school so that my voice is heard and so that decisions aren't made without me but with me and alongside me, and that my voice has been heard? Because sometimes as a school principal, I would hear all the voices, but I couldn't always do everything they wanted me to do.
Sure.
But then I had the opportunity to explain why or why not, and how they could help me with whatever decision did have to be made.
Sure.
So that's huge for a principal to have that community involvement, and also for the district. We're also focusing on the employee experience and trying to recruit and retain and elevate our Latina population in the district. So if you want to become a paraprofessional, a teacher, if you're coming from another country and have a degree, you can become a teacher. I actually recruited one of my best kindergarten teachers when she was enrolling her son for kindergarten. And I asked her what she did, and she told me she was a kitchen manager in the district. And then we started talking about her past, and she told me that she was a teacher in Peru. And I'm like, why are you working in the kitchen?
Right.
And she said, well, that was the job I could get.
Right.
I didn't think I could be a teacher. And so I worked with our human resources department, and she's been a teacher now for almost 20 years.
Wow. What a success story.
So there are many ways that you can contribute to the district. We just want to make sure that your voice is always heard.
It starts with that. And I think that's the key about the La Raza report, or La Raza report, is first we have to have awareness of what's going on, right? And once we have awareness, and then we can move on to the next steps, which would be to make sure that your voices are heard and you understand where you have resources and where your voice can be heard, right? And I think as I remember my parents trying to get involved in school more, but a lot of at the time, this is like 25, 30 years ago, at the time there wasn't a whole lot of resources for our Spanish-speaking families like there are today, right? I'm always amazed at how through our interpretations and translations team, it doesn't matter what language, and that's just not just Spanish, it doesn't matter what language, you can get the information that you need from the district in your language. What's also is you can have an interpreter. So if you're going back to school night, for example,
Yep.
or you're at graduation and you want to hear what they're saying, but you want to hear it in your language, you can request interpretations so that you can have that. That's something that was just not available, but I don't know if a lot of our parents know that it's out there. You know, all of our families know that it's out there.
And the schools will actually provide the interpretation without you asking for it if the Infinite Campus information is correct. So if you were a Spanish speaker on Infinite Campus, it will say parent requests information in Spanish or in Chinese or in, I think French is another one of the consent decree languages.
Sure.
There's 7 of them out there.
Yeah.
And so you should be able to expect that interpretation will be available for you at whatever school activities are happening. And if it's not, then it's really important that you let the principal know that, hey, I need this, or let the secretaries know. Secretaries are the most amazing human beings in schools. I am a servant leader, and so are they. And it really comes out when they come into the school and are having an issue. The secretary it's amazing what they can get done, and they will make sure that your language is correct in Infinite Campus so that interpretation is available when you arrive.
That's such a great resource. Before we go, I want to kind of introduce a little pop culture on the fly here at the show. And the reason why I ask this is because I recently watched the movie The Long Game with Jay Hernandez. It's about a group of Hispanic students in Texas who wanted to play golf and they wouldn't let them play golf in the 50s. So that being said, what is one of your favorite movies that has inspired you?
That one's actually on my list to watch.
That's such a good movie.
So I'm guessing something like that will probably be it. I would probably say Stand and Deliver with Edward James Olmos. And I actually got to go to the high school when did I go? In June. And it's incredible because the old building isn't there anymore, but they have this huge mural that shows all of the things that he did and how he advocated for his students and how those high expectations made all the difference for those students, regardless of what the resources were, regardless of what the outside world was telling them. I would say that's probably been the most inspirational movie to me.
One that I want to put on your list is I think it's with Michael Pena, A Million Miles Away.
Oh, I haven't seen it.
I haven't finished it, but halfway through.
Okay.
But the beginning of it, and you'll like this because you're as a school principal, you'll know that in the beginning they're picking fruit from the fields, and the students keep going back and forth, moving schools, going back to Michoacan, and the teacher gives them an analogy, says, what would happen if you planted a tree, dug it up, uprooted it, and moved it every year? How strong would that tree be? And it clicked.
Yeah.
And it clicked. And I think that a lot of our Latine families, it'll say this in the report, right? Like, we do work multiple jobs, right? We do have different responsibilities. It is a culture thing. And so I think it's important to understand that, but also see ourselves in pop culture, in film, right? Because I think those are very important. And so I just wanted to ask that on the fly. But before we let you go, is there a final message that you want to give to the families, to the students, to anyone who will be working with you in the future?
I think the most important thing is that we see you. We see you. We are here to help. We are here to do whatever it takes to ensure that that you are successful in our system. Que viva la raza.
Wow.
And we need to do it together. This is not a job that I do alone. When I received my doctorate degree and I got my hooding, the most important message I think I gave to the people who came to support me was I didn't do this alone, and I didn't do it for myself.
Community.
It's all about the community. I may be starting it, but I'm not the one who's going to take it all the way through to fruition. I'm going to lay the best foundation I can possibly lay, because I'm not going to live forever.
Right.
And so whoever continues this work, I want to make sure they have a solid foundation to start from, and that it is so embedded in our system that it cannot be undone. Because, you know, just like I won't be here forever, Dr. Marrero won't be here forever, our program manager Liliana won't be here forever, you won't be here forever. There always has to be a champion of the work, and that champion needs a foundation to work from.
And to continue moving forward.
Yep.
Well, I want to thank you so much for being on the show today. This concludes our EDUCA podcast for today. Again, big thank you to our guest, Dr. Patricia Urrieta, I call her Dr. Pat, for sharing this important information. And I want to ask all of our audience members to please share this content and subscribe to our YouTube channel. This way we can continue to bring more of this content and resources to you all. You can find us on YouTube at Denver Public Schools Plus. You can also find all of our other multimedia productions. And if you prefer a podcast platform, you can also find us on your favorite podcast platform. Just search for the Denver Public Schools Podcast Network. Let's lead with gratitude, and our gratitude goes out to the entire communications department. And a big thank you to our proud superintendent of Denver Public Schools, Dr. Alex Marrero, for the continued support for this EDUCA podcast and all of our multimedia productions. Don't forget to tune in into our next EDUCA DPS podcast, where the learning journey continues. And remember to tell your children more often, I believe in you and I know you can do it. I'm Javier Ibarra. Until next time.